Todd Daly is Assistant Professor of Theology and Ethics at Urbana Theological Seminary, and the title of his talk is An Incarnational View of Nature.
It's always exceedingly difficult to follow up some very impressive presentations with very cool graphics with the reading of a theology paper late in any afternoon. So I'm going to keep this mercifully short. It's again probably dangerous to have a theologian talk this late in the afternoon anyway, especially when we're trying to bring together two admittedly very complex subjects, of theology and the environment. And I suppose that being quite new to the interaction of these two disciplines, I think the wallpaper is an apposite metaphor of the state of my mind on these topics. But I hope that what I have to present to you will be somewhat coherent. I want to start briefly with an unrepeatable, unlikely, once-in-a-lifetime experience I had about 7 or 8 years ago when I was camping up in northern Minnesota, up in the Boundary Waters. I was new to this whole outdoorsman kind of thing, and we had been in the wilderness, I guess, for about 6 days, and were portaging back to civilization, and we had run out of water. So in the middle of one of these lakes, I was encouraged by the other gentleman in the canoe to pick up the tin cup and just take a drink of water out of the lake. And I thought he was kidding, but he was actually serious. So I was so thirsty at that point I didn't care anymore. So I did. I scooped up a cup of water and took a look at it, smelled it, looked for any kind of foreign objects, sipped it a little bit, no aftertaste, quite good, and then gulped it down. No strange after effects, no hallucinations, and no scorching diarrhea afterwards. I was actually fine. Go figure. Drinking a cup of water out of a lake and not getting ill. Why does this experience stick out in my mind? Well, I'm glad you asked. It is certainly not to demonstrate the lengths to which one must go to get fresh drinking water. The fact that I was able to drink water from a lake highlights the extent to which we are polluting our planet and damaging our environment. But even that is a distortion, for in reality, that a comparatively wealthy Anglo-American living in a country which comprises roughly 5% of the world's population, 22% of its wealth, and nearly 25% of the world's emissions has the luxury to take some time off to go camping, to enjoy nature, and to drink from a lake instead of drinking purified water is to greatly distort the picture. For there are many in the world who have no access to purified water at all and suffer perpetual maladies and disease on account of it. Equally troubling is the indifference to environmental damage or even outright denial of environmental damage on the part of many Christians. Witness the recent We Get It campaign launched by evangelical pastors, scientists, and policymakers, which questions the science behind global warming, asserting that Christians essentially can be green without being gullible. The declaration says that God created the world, that human beings as Christians must take responsibility for that creation, and that billions of people will suffer if careless environmental policies are put in place. However, a statement made by one of the persons who signed this declaration, Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council and a supporter of We Get It, a statement that he made, as published on the internet, is both deeply revealing and profoundly troubling. For he believes that future generations deserve more than just clean air and water. I quote him, he says, "I'm afraid that the image that my children will remember is the image of naive Americans who surrendered our national sovereignty and the income of families to pursue science that is speculative at best. Not a whole lot of theology in that statement. In fact, there's some profoundly troubling images there, particularly concerning national sovereignty. Why are Christians not more concerned about the ways in which we are damaging our environment?
That's the crux of the question.
Yes. Amen. Some answers are even more frightening in some of the blog responses to this We Get It campaign movement on the internet. Risk It All for Him, the blogger, calls this a tool of Satan to take our focus off the gospel of Jesus Christ because this world is not our home. And then I quote him, "I will be calling focus on the family, letting them know my disappointment of James Dobson wasting his time on this." I actually agree with that one. Maybe we ought to call Dobson, but for very different reasons, and tell him that he's wasting time on this. Another respondent says, "Scripturally speaking, we can certainly say that mankind is extremely arrogant to even think that he can cause the end of the world as we know it." And then he goes on to quote 2 Peter 3:10, which speaks of the heavens disappearing, the melting of the elements, and at least in some English versions of the Bible, the burning up of the earth. I'll just note parenthetically here that the NIV renders this troubling Greek verb heurisko as laying bare the earth and not burning up. And some other Greek sources almost throw up their hands in exasperation and say, we just don't know how to interpret that word. Now, while these responses, I would suggest, probably represent the extreme within the more fundamentalist strands of Christianity, I suspect that there remains a considerable number of more mainline Christians whose relationship to the environment is ambiguous at best. The above two responses, which effectively entail an appeal either to humanity as the pinnacle of God's creation having ultimate concern, or an appeal to God's omnipotence and sovereignty as a sort of kind of ecological safeguard, would seem to prove Lynn White Jr. correct in his infamous or famous article entitled "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis," where he argued that the blame lie largely with Christians, particularly in their celebration of man over against nature. I quote him from this article, "Christianity has not only established a dualism of man and nature, but has also insisted that it is God's will that man exploit nature for his proper ends. Hence, we shall continue to have a worsening ecological crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve man." In defense of White, he was very quick to caution, writing as a Christian, that Christianity is an enormously complex movement, although it seems many have not heeded his own warning. White himself saw potential offered a solution in the theology of St. Francis of Assisi, who attempted to depose man from his monarchy over the created order in favor of a democracy of God's creatures, where the ant no longer serves as a homily for the lazy man, per Proverbs, nor does fire represent upward yearnings of the soul toward God. Rather, the ant and fire join with us in praise to the Creator, in White's words, as brother ant and sister fire. While White's charge may not be entirely fair, several theologians have detected in the development of Christian theology a shift away from a cosmic view of redemption to a more anthropocentric view, variously understood as soul salvation, largely under the influence of Greek thought, leaving a rather ambiguous view concerning both human embodiment and corruptible creation. Michael Northcott, for instance, detects the shift towards soul salvation all the way back in the Theology of Athanasius, in his work entitled On the Incarnation, where he speaks of the redemptive activity of the Logos, the divine Logos, taking on inherently unstable, transient flesh, dying and rising again, and ensuring a future resurrection.